Hi everyone, welcome back to How the Kitchen. Now in the last episode, we went through some intermediate cooking techniques. This week, we're going to do a bit more involved cooking. So we have 2 dishes for you today and a total of 5 cooking techniques. Now these techniques are a little bit more involved and they're used on a daily basis in professional kitchens. Mastering these techniques may seem a little bit challenging, but once you get the hang of it, we hope you have the confidence to also use these on a regular basis inside your home kitchens. So what are these 2 dishes? Now the first is a handmade pasta from scratch with a pesto sauce and a seared piece of salmon. Alright, fresh pasta, you're gonna need a couple of things. First, make sure your hands are clean, no watches, no jewelry, fingernails short. Next thing you need is a nice clean surface. I'm working directly on the surface, so I've scrubbed this clean because there's gonna be food in contact with it. I've got some extra flour for dusting. I've measured out 290 grams of flour here, 2 large eggs and 3 egg yolks. I've got some salt, some extra virgin olive oil, and a little bit of water with a spoon. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna have our flour down on the table in a mound, like so. What you're gonna do is you're gonna turn your hand into this spade-like thing, and then you're gonna make a mound, sort of hole in the center of the mound. Right, next, you wanna incorporate the eggs. So you've got 2 eggs here, 2 whole eggs, and 3 egg yolks. You're gonna put in a good pinch of salt. This is about 3/4 of a tablespoon of salt, as well as a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil. Right, now it's time to mix. We're gonna use our hands here. Now I'm gonna break the yolks first, and I'm gonna slowly stir them around and incorporate more and more flour until I gather the entire mass into a dough, and then I'm gonna knead it, okay? Alright, so what's happening here? As you see, the egg has picked up some of the flour. It's getting a little bit sticky now. And we're gonna go ahead and incorporate the rest of the flour into this dough mixture. Constantly gathering what you have. This portion I'm making is enough to serve about 3 people, or 2 if you're kind of greedy like me. So what kind of texture am I looking for overall in a pasta dough? A pasta dough needs to be smooth and silky, and slightly just tacky to the touch. Now it's not supposed to stick to your hand like slime, and it's certainly not supposed to adhere and start leaving residue all over the place, but it has to be quite supple, and you should be able to feel some moisture in it. I've just been working this smaller piece of dough. This is at halfway, and you can see it start to get a little bit smoother, and the texture is very different. This is quite tacky, and it sort of kind of feels like flesh almost. Is that a good way to describe it? Not really. But I'm gonna keep kneading this until I get a nice, smooth, supple dough. Right, so those 2 portions of dough that I had just now, I've been trying to work them further, and I've added even more water. Now, a little bit of a description on the action I'm doing now. Remember the heel of the palm? I gather the dough, and then I use the heel of the palm to push it against the tabletop, thus stretching it and rolling it as I go. This is the essence of kneading a dough. Now, after repeated kneading, this is what you should see. Nice yellow color in my dough. As I press into it, it springs back quite quickly, and the surface is nice and smooth. I'm not seeing too many lines when I pull the dough apart. I'm quite satisfied with this. It's quite supple as well, but it could use a rest. Now, resting pasta dough is essential. If you don't rest your dough, what happens is when you try and roll this guy out, he will spring back and resist you as you cut him into noodles, essentially. So pasta dough should always be rested and relaxed. Then I'm gonna rest this inside a bowl and cover this with a moist paper towel or a moist cloth. How long to rest your pasta dough for? You wanna give this at least half an hour, sometimes even 45 minutes. Store this in a warm place that's not too dry. Make sure it's covered with a moist towel. While my pasta's resting, it's time to make some pesto. So a pesto is really simple. You've got 3 main components, and then you can add additional things to it. The 3 main components are an aromatic leaf. In this case, and most oftenly, they use sweet basil or holy basil. You need a hard cheese. This can be Grana Padano, it can be Pecorino. Most people use a nice aged Parmesan. And finally, you need a nut. The most common type of pesto is pine nuts, which can be expensive. So you can use cashews, you can use peanuts, and today I'm using pistachios. I'm also going to be adding a small clove of raw garlic into the pesto to give it a bit of kick. And you can choose to add, at this point, chili flakes, roasted garlic. Some people I know add onions and shallots, which is not my thing, but a pesto is basically a paste. Now today I'm going to be using a food processor attachment with a hand blender to go about making my pesto. This just makes things very, very easy. You're going to take just the leaves off, avoiding the flowers and avoiding the stems. And what we're going to do to help everything inside that blender is we're going to chiffonade the leaves slightly, and I'll show you how to do that. Now, what is chiffonade? A chiffonade is like making thin ribbons and thin strips out of a leaf. And the easiest way to do that is to stack your leaves of basil together, creating layers of basil leaf. Now once you stack maybe about 8 leaves together, I'm going to just roll this into a tight bundle. And with a sharp knife, I'm going to start cutting ribbons. What you can see right now is these thin strips of basil leaf coming out. You can use this as a garnish on all sorts of food. You can use this in salads too. But this is going to go into our food processor attachment today for our stick blender to make our pesto. The next thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to grate my cheese. So I'm using a microplane for that. This is one of my favorite kitchen items to use. Very handy utensil. And when I'm grating cheese, I like to have a nice large prep bowl so I can put my microplane up at an angle like that, press down on the bowl, and start grating the stuff that I need. Okay, it's a fair amount of cheese. Probably more than I need, but you know, you can always use more cheese. I'm just gonna add a little clove or fresh garlic, just for a little bit of bite. Now, if I don't want that sort of raw garlic flavor, I can always roast a little bit of garlic and get that soft and then blend that into the pesto as well. Now, these pistachios that I have here have been roasted already. Do not make your pesto with nuts that have not been roasted. It'll taste bad, there'll be no texture, it'll just be kind of weird and waxy. So into my food processor attachment, I'm gonna put a handful of pistachios. I'm gonna put my basil in as well. And these thin ribbons of basil are gonna help with the chopping up. If I added just whole basil leaves in there, probably wouldn't be as pretty. My garlic goes in, and a good glug of extra virgin olive oil. Don't be shy with the extra virgin olive oil. This is a pesto after all. And a handful of cheese. You can always add more cheese later if you want to, because the cheese is essentially sort of finely grated up and shredded already. Right, let's take a look at the consistency right now. It flows slowly, it's not too liquid. It's a nice fresh green color. You can see the chunks of pistachios in there. You can see a little bit of cheese as well for some texture. I'm quite happy with this. Pesto is really easy to keep. You can put this in the fridge for up to a week. The color will get darker as you go because the leaves will continue to oxidize. Generally, don't keep it past a week because you have raw leaves in there and you have cheese as well. But if you're gonna make pesto, might as well use it in a day or two. It's so easy to make anyway. There's no need to store so much of it. We're gonna be pickling some fennel now as a quick garnish to our salmon. And pickling is one of those techniques that is used constantly in professional kitchens. Pickling is great because it adds crunch and texture for vegetables, and it gives you a zing. It gives you this very nice ability to add acidity without making it too sour, sort of. Pickles work great because they cut some of the fatty flavors from the tongue. They help to brighten up a dish, and they just make very, very fun things to do because pickled garnishes always look very nice and add little pops of flavor all over something that's a little bit salty or a little bit fatty. Okay, so this is a fennel bulb. Now I'm going to be cutting this with a mandolin. So a mandolin is this sharp blade, and you can vary the thickness of the baffle plate here so that when I slice things, I can get them very, very, very thin, thinner than I can get them consistently with my knife. A mandolin is a relatively useful item. In kitchens and restaurants, we use them all the time. But at home, if you want to slice things very quickly and slice things very thin, a good mandolin is very, very useful, okay? So before we get to slicing the fennel very thin with a mandolin, we're gonna make a very quick pickling base. Now, pickling bases are essentially just an acid with a little bit of sugar and some aromatics if you choose to add them. Things like mustard seed, things like juniper berry, things like thyme, bay leaf, you can add even. Today I'm just gonna make a very, very basic pickling liquid with a little bit of water, vinegar, salt, and sugar. So I have a small handled pot here, perfect size for just a little bit of pickling liquid. A little bit of vinegar. We're using apple cider today. And a bit of sugar. And a good pinch of salt. Give that a stir. As soon as everything starts to dissolve, it will start to come to a bubble very quickly. So it's time for me to start slicing my fennel very thin. So I've got this root end here. I'm going to take the tip off of that. And now I'm going to go cross against the grain and see what kind of thin strips I'm going to get with my mandolin. Now that I've mandolin my fennel, can you see it's got all this nice sort of eye-catching shape to it. This is perfect. It's going to make a great garnish together with my salmon. And I love the smell of fennel, but the act of pickling it removes some of the licorice taste of raw fennel, so that's an added benefit also. So make sure your pickling liquid is at a full boil, and then take the fennel that you just mandolined and dump it in there, and then off the heat, give it a bit of a stir, and this fennel can sit in here for maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes. That's enough to give it some bright flavor. Past that point, it doesn't get even more sour. The flavor will be constant. You can store it in the pickling liquid indefinitely inside the fridge. A lot of cultures pickle stuff so that they can keep them to eat in other times. And this is an act of preservation as well. All right, back to our pasta that's been resting nicely. Now you can see that it is really soft and supple now and smooth. To start off with, flour your rolling pin, flour your hands briefly, and then dust a tabletop surface that you're going to be working with a little bit of flour. I want to have this in as sort of uniform a shape as possible, so I'm going to try and form it into a quick rectangle first. A lot of people take out pasta dough, it's round, and then you roll it out and you get a nice circle, which doesn't help you with cutting your pasta because a circle has a lot of wastage. Pasta, when cut, is usually in some sort of geometric shape, right? Long, thin, fat, but usually in strips. So what I like to do is I like to form my pasta ball into sort of a log that's a bit more rectangular. And this will help me with my shaping. All right, let's go. The key here now is to roll this out as thin and as flat as possible. Okay, time to start cutting. I've got more or less a sort of rectangular shape. I'm going to trim off one end first to give me slightly better shaping there. So what you can do now to make your life really easy is to give this a nice dusting of flour on both sides. And proceed to roll this up 4 times. Half. And then 4 times. I'm going to cut it down the center real quick. And you can see that I have these layers here, these nice, even sort of sheets like a book. Now, starting with a small bundle, what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the kind of thickness that I want each noodle strand to be. Now, if I want this to be very, very fine noodles, I can come very, very close. But pasta, especially with pesto, is meant to be eaten with a slightly more heartier noodle shape. So I'm going to go with sort of like a hor fun or a kway teow kind of thickness, about 1 centimeter. I'm going to cut down. And you will see that when I unravel this, I have a nice noodle. So we're going to repeat this throughout this portion of folded pasta. After which, you should be able to unravel and you have a nice bundle of noodles. I'm going to place these noodles onto a tray. It's been well dusted with flour. Dust these noodles too. And you guys can sit tight until I'm ready to cook with you. Now on to our main course. We're going to combine the pasta that we made together with a main course protein. And that's our lovely piece of salmon here. Using a really sharp knife, you want to make 3 cuts, not too deep. Now what happens is doing this will help the skin stay flat. The surface of the fish will be in contact with the pan that's hot, and we will have a nice crispy surface there for you to enjoy as you tuck into it, yeah? Now the next thing you want to do is make sure that the skin of the salmon is very, very dry. Now if your skin is full of moisture when it goes into the pan, instead of hearing that nice sizzle, all you will have is sort of a little bit of steaming, and you're not going to get that browning so easily. So paper towel, fold that a little bit, and just put that in contact with the surface of the skin. And now feel the skin, it should be sort of like tacky and not wet and glistening at all. Just do that 2 more times. Make sure I absorb as much of that moisture as possible. Now while that's drying, I'm gonna preheat my pan. Now we're gonna go with a medium heat here. What we're trying to achieve is a low and slow browning. We're gonna cook the fish a majority on one side. And as we see the fish get cooked from the skin side up, we'll flip it for a final bit of cooking on the other side, okay? So now that I got my piece of fish here like this, I'm gonna season that briefly. Right, pan's looking quite warm. I'm gonna add in a bit of olive oil. And then, fish goes in skin side down. Again, you wanna hear and you wanna listen for that sizzle. If you don't hear that sizzle, your pan's not hot enough. Now you don't wanna fiddle with this too much, you wanna leave it to cook. Now you wanna make sure your heat is not too high, because if your heat is too high, you end up burning the skin before you cook a majority of the fish. The other thing that happens when your heat is too high is it tends to bend the fish because you're forcing the outside to cook. And the center and the top, you can see, has not begun to cook yet, and the fish starts to bend. You can also get these unsightly white marks, this albumin that's coming out of the fish because it's a little bit too tense. So with a nice piece of salmon fillet like that, the best bet is to cook nice and slow on medium to low heat. Now I'm gonna rotate this to show you what the skin looks like at this point. You can see it browning very gently, and it's starting to take on a nice golden hue. One of the things I get asked the most is, how do I know when my meat is done? How do I know when my fish is done? Now with a fish like salmon, I personally prefer to cook this quite medium. If a good piece of salmon gets into your hands, the last thing you want to do is to overcook this to the point that everything is stringy and dry and sort of powdery almost. That will happen if you overcook your fish. How do you tell your fish is cooking? If you look at the base of the skin where the fish is in contact with the pan, it's starting to turn white and pale as you move up from the skin. So I know this fish is almost done, and I have to flip it when it's come up just past about halfway, the halfway mark, and then I'm gonna give it a flip to cook on the other side. At this point, I'm gonna salt the meat side of the fish. Looking at the sort of side of cooking on the fish, I'm quite pleased. This is coming out to about the halfway mark. I think it's time for me to give it a good flip. Very gently with a pair of tongs, taking care not to break apart the fish. Give it a nice, gentle flip. I'm quite pleased with this. Leaving the center a little bit rare is just my style. And don't forget, this will carry on to cook further once it leaves the pan. And you can see that even though it's quite pink, it feels relatively firm. So this is about done enough for me. A good piece of salmon should always be just slightly silky and just slightly under in the center. Okay, fish coming out of the pan. Quite happy with that. You can go and sit and rest and come to temperature. Right, my pasta's gonna go into the water, and as soon as it gets cooked, it's gonna go into a bowl together with my pesto. I'm gonna toss to cook. Once again, my water's only been salted. I never put oil inside my pasta water. I don't want it to come out oily and then not have a sauce stick to it. 1 and 2, that should do it. Now, fresh pasta, because it's full of moisture, right, it's gonna cook much faster than dried pasta. If dried pasta takes about 7 to 8 minutes, fresh pasta could take anything from 3 to 4 minutes only. So it's important to monitor this quickly and to try this as soon as you think it's done. In my mixing bowl, I'm gonna put 2 nice heaping tablespoons of pesto into a bowl. And now I'm just gonna try the pasta to make sure it's just about cooked. Indeed it is. Oh, that's good. Okay, I want to remove some of the water, but a little bit of water is fine. It helps to emulsify the sauce. In you go. And now, the magic happens. Because your pasta had no oil in the water, it's still hungry for a little bit more moisture. But there's nothing on the outside that is making it slippery. So right now, this pesto is adhering to the side of my pasta. very willingly. So that was 2 tablespoons of pesto for this amount of pasta. I think I can go with a little bit more. Another good tablespoon or 2. You can really see the sauce adhering to each strand of pasta. It's nice and glistening, it's shiny, and they're really just sitting proudly on every strand, every surface. Oh, fresh pasta and pesto. Does not get better than that. Okay, once I'm happy that every strand has been coated and there's a sufficient, read a lot of pesto, I am ready to start plating my dish. Loosen up some of the noodles. So I have a fairly nice bundle like this. I will start to turn it with the tongs. So I have a nice bundle. Then you slip it off the pair of tongs. Now that's good for maybe a small person, a child, a quarter of me. Nah, that's not enough. So I'm gonna go and add more to the plate. Place it on the side, and then as you release a pair of tongs, leave the pasta on the plate. Now with my piece of fish that has been resting nicely, I'm going to ease you over the top. Then my pickled fennel. I don't want too much of that liquid, even though it's nice and tasty and bright. Bit of extra virgin olive oil. With pasta always comes a little bit more cheese, so I'm gonna give you a bit of rain there. And just to finish off, remind you of the flavors that we have created with our pesto. A dollop or 2 over the side of the pasta. And we're done. Just a little bit of flake salt over the fish. What you have here is a very nice piece of crispy skinned salmon that's been cooked medium rare, just the way I like it. Some fresh pasta that's been coated with our fresh pesto that we made from scratch. And a little bit of pickled fennel with some additional grana padano grated over the pasta. This is a hearty meal. This is as satisfying as a meal as it gets. And the fresh pasta with the pesto, believe me, will make you want to go through the effort of making fresh pasta. It truly is worth it. Once you've had your first bite of fresh pasta, you will understand why. We're done with main course, now on to desserts. Right, today we're going to be making choux from scratch. I'm going to be filling this with a very simple raspberry cream that I'm going to be making with some raspberry jam. Now, choux is one of those things that's commonly used as a dessert in a lot of fancy high-end restaurants, but also in a lot of bakeries too. Understanding how to make choux teaches you to be patient, teaches you a couple of things because we're making the choux dough from scratch. This is called a pâte à choux. Pâte à choux. I'm terrible at pronouncing this style of stuff, so let's just call it the choux dough, okay? The pâte à choux. And the pâte à choux is basically a combination of a liquid, a little bit of butter, some flour, and some eggs. So what I've got here is a bit of flour, seasoned with a little bit of salt. I've got 4 fresh eggs that have been cracked. These are whole eggs. I have a little bit of milk and water together with some butter in this pan. Just to let you guys know what you're getting into, making choux from scratch is a relatively tiring endeavor. Now you can use a stand mixer to make short work of this, but we're gonna do it the traditional way today, using a wooden spoon and some good old elbow grease, okay? To begin with, get your milk, your water, and your butter on a boil. Now just a tip when you're making choux, you want to use what I call a saucepan. Saucepans have a relatively deep cup and they always have a nice good handle for you to hold so you can really just stir things with wild abandon. Perfect for making choux. Now I need this handle to stabilize the pot because as it comes to a boil now, I'm going to be adding my flour in and I'm going to be cooking this flour down. You can see straight away the flour starts to absorb all the liquid, and the more I stir, the drier and thicker it becomes. Now this is exactly what I want. This is called cooking down the dough. And you can see it coming together in this sort of like pale, sort of bouncy looking thing. At this point, I'm gonna keep cooking it to remove as much moisture as possible. Most recipes will tell you to do this over low heat for about 3 minutes. At this point, you wanna make sure you're looking at the dough, and if you see any bits of flour, you wanna use the back of your wooden spoon to smoosh them against the side of the pot. Again, looking for any strange bits that have not been fully incorporated. And soon you will start to see a thin surface of starch forming on the inside of the pan. Now once this starts to coat the entire bottom of the pan, you know more or less that your dough has been cooked enough, and it's time to let it rest before we add the eggs in. Now the goal here is to get these 4 eggs into the choux dough, but because the choux dough is very warm and very hot, if I were to add these eggs in there, they would cook and scramble, which would leave very unsightly looking things inside. So we're gonna let the dough cool just for a little bit before I add the eggs in. Meanwhile, I'm gonna be making my raspberry cream filling. Now a quick word on filling for choux pastry. Generally speaking, you want something that has a little bit of richness to it, but also a little bit of acidity. I prefer something nice and bright. So you can have things like lemon curd. Today we're gonna be making a raspberry cream. So there's a little bit of acidity from the raspberry jam, and the richness comes from the nice fresh whipping cream. Now how we're gonna do this is very simple. You whip the cream to its halfway state, and then you add the jam in and you finish that by whisking some more until the cream starts to peak and become stiff. Right, again with my handy stick blender attachment, in you go. Okay, so the cream has started to thicken up slightly now. You can feel it sort of a little bit more hollow and full of air. That's great. Add the jam in early, because if your cream has been fully whipped and is now at stiff peaks, if you add the jam in and continue whipping, you'll break the cream and you'll get like the beginnings of butter. Not a good look. Now if you can take a look at this close up, you can see it's really thickened up to a large extent. And I'm just gonna finish this by getting it to stiff, thick peaks. Okay, it's feeling kind of stiff. It's feeling nice and thick now. And I think I'm good. It's not flowing out, that's when you know it's been whisked fully. So this raspberry cream now needs to go into the fridge until I want to use it to fill the choux. Now coming back to my choux pastry, my pâte de choux, that has now cooled slightly. Now I'm going to add eggs one at a time into the pâte de choux, and I'm going to blend this in with my trusty wooden spoon. Once each egg has been blended inside, you add the next egg. One of the things that can help you with this arduous physical activity is don't hold your spoon at one end. This makes it very hard to control. You find that when we need to stir things that are very, very stiff and thick, we choke down on the spoon and fold it against our forearm for extra leverage. What we're stirring here, you can see, is really quite thick and viscous. You wouldn't want to do this with a whisk. You will want to do this step with a stand mixer. Put everything in with a balloon whisk, turn it on, add egg by egg. But at this point, all of you are kitchen enthusiasts now, so you must understand what it's like to do this by hand. Once you figure out what the texture should be like and you're familiar with it, then you can go ahead and use a machine. Now I'm done mixing my pâte de choux. I'm quite pleased and happy. It's a uniform color. Now if you look at it, it's glossy, it flows quite well, it smells faintly eggy, and it's got this lovely luster, this sheen. Now that this is complete, time to put this into a piping bag. Now if you don't have a piping bag, what you can do is you can get a Ziploc bag and you can fill the Ziploc bag, seal it, and then cut one of the holes out. Today I'm using a piping bag because I like piping bags and they make piping things like choux out very easy. If there are any air bubbles, get them out. You want to start gathering the dough toward the bottom of the bag, like so. Right, next thing, time to pipe. You've got your choux inside a bag, it's nice and warm. It feels like a sort of a body temperature. It's not creepy at all. Anyway, so now you have this tray. Instead of baking inside this tray, for choux, I tend to like to bake on the reverse side. Why? Because it gives me one nice flat piece and I don't have edges that can help to sort of get in the way of things. So now, I take a piece of wax paper and I fold it to meet my dimensions. Now bearing in mind that these little puffs, these choux puffs that I bake will expand I need to bake them such that they each have space to grow. So I'm going to find a center point for each of the little shoe puffs, and I'm going to estimate that I can squeeze 4 across, and 1, 2, 3. Maybe 3 to be safe, and that's 12. So I'm going to start with 1 down here, and with shoe, you want to let them come up a little bit. I'm going to show you what you should not do with shoe. I'm going to bake one wonky fellow, okay? I'm going to press him close to the surface, and then I'm going to spread him around like that. That is not what you want to do. And mark my words, when we bake this later, you'll see this guy come out like flat and silly looking. You want to give them a little bit of height, which means as you pipe, you want to lift. Now there's this poop looking tail. We're going to press these down with a little bit of water and a bit, and I'll show you how to do that, okay? Now taking a little bit of water and a clean finger, dab your finger into the water, and with a wet finger, you may now press these little tails down. Now if you don't press these tails down, they will burn and they'll leave these little dark bits. Not very appetizing. So I've got a tray of shoe ready to go into the oven. I'm gonna put these in and I'm gonna bake them for the better part of 11 minutes at about 200 degrees Celsius. Now each oven is slightly different, and I urge you to try a smaller shoe recipe and try this at home with your oven at various temperatures until you get your recipe correct. Some ovens are hotter, some ovens have bigger fans. It really depends, and you're gonna have to try and experiment with this a little bit. Right, so if you open the oven door all the way and then you slowly take your tray and everything, then the oven's gonna lose temperature. You don't want to do that because, especially for shoe, you want them to cook fast and puff up quickly. So, a good way is to prepare your tray in front of the oven, open the oven and stick them in as fast as possible. We're gonna do that right now. 3, 2, and 1. So, and in that goes. Done. Versus opening the door and then getting the tray and then letting the heat come out and putting that in and then closing that. At this point, all that's left for us to do is to prepare some mittens or a glove or a couple of tongs so we can pull the tray out once the shoe are complete. And this little wonky guy. Okay, here we go. So this is the exact same order they were piped onto the tray. Now you see the one closest to the fan, because the tray went into the oven this way. So the fan tends to be on this side, and it was blowing against one section. So you can see on this side, these tend to be the darker looking shoes. These have an even color. And on this side, they're not so evenly cooked because they didn't get an even stream of hot air. So this is what happens inside ovens. There's going to be hot bits and cool bits. So it's really up to you to figure out what is the temperament of your oven and what you're cooking inside. You will have to experiment a couple of times. But this is the difference in the heat mapping inside an oven. Now remember, I piped one very low and flat piece of shoe. This is what happens when you do that. You get this wonky guy that's this thin, compared to an average looking puff that has this much lift. Right, the next thing we're gonna do now is we're gonna cut these open and we're gonna fill them with our raspberry cream. Now, if you've made your shoe correctly, you will see that they are actually hollow. There is a fair amount of hollow surface inside, and this is how we're gonna fill the shoe pastries. Our chilled raspberry cream has been sitting in the fridge. Very simple to take your shoe. And that's a filled shoe. A little bit of icing sugar. And just get this dusted over. And there you go, you have shoe puffs freshly baked with a raspberry cream filling. So we come to the end of the episode and the end of our series as well, How to Kitchen. Now, over the course of this series, we've gone through some basic, intermediate, and a little bit more involved, advanced techniques for you to use in the kitchen. Now, we hope with this series, you'll be able to understand how to organize your kitchen a bit better, work out your workflow, and utilize some kitchen techniques in your daily cooking. If you want to see more videos like this, let us know. Don't forget to click like, subscribe, and hit the bell below so you get a notification every time we put up a new video. Alternatively, you can download the Click Network app and watch the videos there. Till next time, perhaps in another kitchen somewhere, this is Ming signing off for How to Kitchen. Thank you.